I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Jon Allen, former ambassador to Israel, is with us tonight. He's written some really interesting articles of late talking about a two-state solution and how he still hasn't lost hope for what peace could happen in the Middle East. He's currently a senior fellow at the Bill Graham School in Toronto, and it's a real pleasure to have him with us tonight. Professor Allen, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So why have you not lost hope?
I've not lost hope because I truly believe that for both the 7.5 million Jewish Israelis and for the 7.5 million Palestinians that currently share the territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, that two states is the only option for them going forward if they're going to be able to live in peace and security. And I really believe that with the proper leadership that has a longer-term vision of their own people, and leadership that's prepared to make some compromises on some issues that have been known since Bill Clinton and President Abbas and Yitzhak Rabin were in the White House many years ago. Those same issues are on the table, and if there are people with vision that are prepared to compromise on some of those issues, then two states will exist, and those people will be able to live in peace.
But with
those
respect,
issues
sir,
are not that difficult.
with respect, sir, that was what, 30 years ago, and nothing positive has happened since. And frankly, if anything, we've gone back. And you say that good leadership. It would appear that the leadership, both in Palestine and in Israel, are going the opposite direction to what you're suggesting makes sense. Where you've got a Palestinian Authority and leaders of Palestine, and certainly Hamas, that wanted to destroy Israel, and you've got an Israeli government that is, it would appear, wanting to follow Donald Trump by deporting everybody.
Well, I think you're absolutely right on 2/3 of it. You've got a government in Israel led by Prime Minister Netanyahu with some very right-wing messianic ministers who want to annex the West Bank and resettle Gaza, who've never been interested in two states. You have Hamas, which is a terrorist group designated by many Western countries, whose goal is a caliphate in the region. It's certainly not one state or two states. And you do have President Abbas, who has been committed to two states ever since I was ambassador. I was in a conference room with him when he stated his support for two states. The Palestinian Authority every day works with the Shin Bet, the Israeli security services, to prevent terrorism in Israel. There are many moderate Palestinians who remain committed to the two-state solution. I'm not saying that Abbas is the right guy. He's been in power for 18 years. He hasn't had free and fair elections. He's corrupt. But then again, Israel has peace treaties with Jordan, with Egypt. They are negotiating right now with the Syrians. They are negotiating with the Lebanese. Those countries don't necessarily have perfect liberal democracies with wonderful elections, et cetera, et cetera. The point here is you want two leaders and two sets of people who realize that continuing an occupation that has been going on for 57 years is not going to lead to peace and security for either side. And I think that will come.
I would hope, and I think lots of people would hope that you're right. I guess I worry that after October the 7th and the incredible, vicious, unbelievable massacre that took place that day, and then frankly also the 60,000 or more Palestinians in Gaza that have been killed by the Israeli. I don't even know what you call it, invasion of Gaza and the military operation in Gaza. Hasn't hatred grown? Hasn't the disgust of the other grown to such an extent that peace is almost not possible to even consider?
Well, if you saw my article, you'll see various examples of where one would have reached the same conclusion. The 1973 Yom Kippur War was essentially started by Egypt. For days, Israel was on the verge of losing. And 4 years later, the president of Egypt was in Israel's parliament, the Knesset, advocating peace along beside an Israeli prime minister. And 2 years later, there was a treaty. For 400 years, Irish Catholics and Protestants fought each other. And we ended up in the 90s with the Troubles, where thousands of people were being killed brutally in bombings, children, innocent women, and innocent men were being killed. We had apartheid, which had lasted a long time, appeared to be getting worse, and yet one day Nelson Mandela was let out of jail. President de Klerk realized that apartheid couldn't continue if his country was going to progress, and we had the end of apartheid. There are many, many examples of situations where people thought peace was impossible. And frankly, the best example is the Second World War. Somewhere between 60 and 80 million people died in the Second World War. And today, Germany and France and the UK are all in NATO together. They were all in the EU together. These people that fought to the death, it wasn't very long after the Second World War that the European coal and steel community was formed with Germany, and then subsequently the European Community, and now the EU. So I really believe, and you're right in a sense, Israelis and Palestinians seem to think that their conflict is more difficult than any other. And I frankly don't think it's that difficult. And I frankly, knowing what the issues that separate them are, and understanding that there are compromises that are possible, I think that at some point, the mothers of Palestinians and the mothers of Israelis are going to say, I've had enough. I'm not sending my children into another war, into another battle where they're going to die, and for no reason, because the land can be shared. and people can live peacefully.
I hope you're right. And it's a voice of positivity that is rarely heard. And so I appreciate you for that. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Jon Allen, who is a former ambassador to Israel. I'm going to ask him a little bit about what that must have been like, because he's got a background that is extremely unique. And then he's got this whole, I think it was a 5 or 6 point rationale in an article that you wrote about why you thought this was the right solution and why now it could happen, which I think a lot of people have completely lost any kind of confidence and faith in that peace could happen. So this will be an interesting conversation today with Jon Allen. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Professor Jon Allen with us tonight. He is a senior fellow at the Bill Graham Center for Contemporary International History at the University of Toronto. He's a former ambassador, a Canadian ambassador to Israel. You're also an ambassador to Spain and Andorra, I think. So that's kind of interesting. You had something to do with the Americas, according to your resume. And also interesting, you were involved in some climate change issues in regards to, what was it, ammonia or something?
The ozone layer.
Ozone layer. So maybe we could chat about that a little bit, because that's something that people think, given the current resident of the White House, that attention to climate change and climate issues and pollution are far less intensive today than they have been in the past. But let me ask you, if I could, what was it like being ambassador to Israel in the middle of all this that we're talking about? How long were you ambassador, sir?
So I was ambassador from 2006 to 2010. It was, relative to what is happening in the region right now, calmer. There was one of the 5 conflicts between Israel and Hamas at the time. We've got to realize that every time there was a calm and there was an effort to try and move things forward, Hamas would take advantage of that and stir up trouble, send rockets into Israel. There would be what's called mowing the grass. The Israelis would go in, they would bomb for a week or 10 days, and then there would be a negotiated settlement. This happened 5 times up until the current 23-month-long war. But the time was quieter. I should say, I was the first Jewish Foreign Service officer to be appointed ambassador. I have a sister that actually lives in the north of Israel with her family, right on the Lebanese border. Many of her friends and colleagues were evacuated when Hezbollah started firing rockets. My wife, who is the child of Holocaust survivors, has an aunt and cousins there. So it was a very unique experience for me as an ambassador, both representing my government, being Jewish in what is strangely a country where the majority of people are Jewish, the only country obviously in the world. But also, I was a representative of the Harper government, which was one of the most pro-Israel governments we've ever had. And that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, I strongly then believed that the settlement project, expanding settlements in the West Bank, was dangerous and was going to cause problems, that it was going to make it more difficult for the two-state solution to come into being, because as you expand settlements, you're taking away the land of Palestinians. It's illegal at international law, etc. So I was kind of caught individually, personally, and officially between sympathy for Israel and Israelis, and with a government that was quite pro-Israel, and my own personal views, which were that if the two sides were going to find peace, then both of them had to make some compromises. You had to stop the terrorism in Gaza, and you had to stop the settlements in the West Bank, and the two sides should be looking for ways to find peace. And I'll just stop in a sense by saying that at the end of Ehud Olmert's term, which was in 2009, he did put a peace proposal on the table just before he was indicted, and Bibi Netanyahu won an election and in which he's been in power really for 15 years. So there was an effort at peace. It was a bit, it didn't have enough time to see the light of day because Olmert was indicted and the Palestinians didn't respond fast enough. And we're where we're at right now.
Yeah, I get the impression that other than whoever's in the White House, Israeli politics doesn't listen to the rest of the world. When you were there, did Israel listen to Canada? Did Israel listen to the leaders of Europe? Did Israel listen to anyone else other than the President of the United States?
No, you're absolutely right on that. The only government, the only state that has sufficient influence on Israel to make it stop doing things or start doing things is the United States, in part because they are the largest weapons supplier to Israel, in part because their diaspora, their Jewish diaspora, is the largest in the world outside of Israel, and in part because the U.S. has a veto at the Security Council and can prevent the Security Council from imposing sanctions on Israel. They aren't the largest trading partner. They're the second largest trading partner. And you might think that Europe, which is the largest trading partner, would have more influence, but frankly, they don't. We didn't have influence because we weren't trying to influence much. We were the good friend, the best friend. During my time, the Prime Minister was not interested in any public criticism of Israel, although he was privately critical at times. But you've hit the nail on the head. Unless Donald Trump, for example, is going to tell Prime Minister Netanyahu to increase humanitarian assistance, stop the current plan to level Gaza City and move 1.1 million people from Gaza City to the south, Netanyahu will likely continue.
The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, and numerous different European leaders have recently recognized Palestine, or indicated they would recognize Palestine as an independent state. Is that a smart move? Does it have any influence? Is it an empty statement?
I've supported that. I testified at a House of Commons committee along with a number of other people for and against. I think it's an important move. I don't think it's just symbolic or performative, as some people say. When you have Canada, Australia, France, the UK, soon New Zealand, Ireland, Spain, signaling essentially that we all believe that the two-state solution is the only way forward, and signaling that Israel, while it's more than entitled to peace and security and safety and quiet, should not have a veto over that, we want to send a signal that we remain committed to two states, we remain committed to the self-determination of the Palestinian people, and that we are going to work towards that. Part of those declarations involved supporting better governance in the Palestinian territory, free and fair elections without Hamas being involved. It included declarations by the Gulf states and the Arab states that they recognized the horrors of October 7, demanded the release of hostages, demanded that Hamas not participate. So there was a whole package of not conditions, but a package of issues that were wrapped up in that recognition that the Western states were trying to emphasize and to include, so that we're not just saying, yes, we recognize a state, even though we know that without the United States support, it's not going to be a full member state in the UN, but we want to send an important signal that this is the way things should go. And, when four of the permanent members of the Security Council, Russia, China, France, and the UK, all recognize or will recognize the Palestinian state, the only one not recognizing it being the US, that's a pretty important signal that this is the way things should go.
You said earlier that you have met the president of the Palestinian Authority. Have you met the Prime Minister of Israel? Have you been in a meeting with him? Have you talked with him? Tell me, if you could, what your read of him is.
I was ambassador when he was elected, and I met him on a couple of occasions in Israel. I was in a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister and our Prime Minister Harper in Ottawa. I've seen him in action, obviously, for many, many years. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is one of the wildest, one of the most effective communicators, both in English and in Hebrew. He has been able to make and keep coalitions together in situations that nobody ever thought was possible. He won elections when he was down in the polls and pulled it out at the last minute. But it was always using negatives. The election that I just mentioned, at the last minute, he claimed that the Arab Israelis were flocking to the polls and were going to lead to violence in Israel. And at the last minute, a number of Israelis decided to vote for him. He has never, ever supported a two-state solution. His father didn't support it, and he has never supported it. And he, up until now, has run a very good Israeli economy and was always praised for both the economy and for Israel's security. He was generally hesitant to go to war. He was generally hesitant to engage. And if he did go to war, he always made sure it was going to be a short-term, 1 week, 10 days kind of affair. And now, because of the situation that he's in, on trial for 3 criminal charges, facing a commission of inquiry as to how October 7 happened under his watch, way down in the polls and unlikely to win the next election, he, according to me and according to many analysts, is prolonging a war now in its 23rd month for essentially political reasons. He has the opportunity right now to agree to a 60-day ceasefire and the release of 10 hostages and getting 18 dead bodies back. He's not picking up on that. He doesn't want to see an end to the war because he knows an end to the war will mean the end of his coalition. His right-wing ministers will pull out. And if there's an end to his coalition, he'll face an election, he'll likely lose, and he'll face a trial, which he's actually been involved in for years. But because there is a war with Iran and a war with Gaza and a war with Hezbollah, he really hasn't had to spend much time in court. And he's avoided a commission of inquiry, which has happened after every war and an incident like October 7. So he's very smart, very tough, and I guess lastly I'll say that he's essentially adopted, as has Donald Trump, the Orban-Bolsonaro line, which is There's a deep state. The media is against him. All of the agencies are against him. He's, as you know, he's fired the head of the Shin Bet. He's trying to fire the Attorney General right now. When the head of the Foreign Relations Committee disagreed with him, he removed him. So there's a whole conspiracy out there, all trying, to put Bibi Netanyahu in jail, and he's the only man defending Israel to the end. And in fact, what he's doing is he's created Israel into a pariah state, which is almost inconceivable. The David of the 1967 war and the 1948 war and the 1973 war has now turned into the Goliath, in which, as you said, it has killed 60,000 Palestinians. Let's say 20,000 of them are Hamasniks, so 40,000, some 18,000 children, a humanitarian siege for 11 weeks when no food, water, or medicine was allowed into an area with 2.1 million people. This isn't the Israel that I grew up knowing, not the Israel that my sister moved to live on a kibbutz, not the Israel that my father supported his whole life because he thought it was important to have a refuge for the Jewish people just in case another Holocaust happened.
So given what you've just described, how could you possibly be hopeful that there's an opportunity for peace? How could you possibly be positive about a two-state solution? It would appear that everything you've just said would suggest that as long as the prime minister is anywhere close to power or in power, he's going to prolong it. Or he's going to prolong strife. He's going to try to deport millions of people. Like, how could you be hopeful given what you've just described, sir?
Because he won't be there forever. I mean, Shimon Peres was a prime minister who was advocating peace his whole life. Yitzhak Rabin was a general who was a hardline general who ended up promoting peace in the White House with Bill Clinton. Arik Sharon was a much criticized general who basically took Israel out of the Gaza Strip because I agree with you, and I think I said it. Mahmoud Abbas has to go, Bibi Netanyahu has to go, and frankly, Donald Trump has to go, and they will all go, and there will be leadership in the region and hopefully in the United States, which will recognize that the two states is really the only way to go.
In your article, you talk about 6 issues, 6 final status issues that need to be addressed. What I'd like to do, sir, if it's okay, is after the message break, let's go through each one of these issues and tell me what you think the issue is and how you think it can and should be addressed. This is going to be an interesting conversation, everyone, about is there any possibility of peace in the Middle East? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Jon Allen. He is a senior fellow at the Bill Graham Center for Contemporary International History at the University of Toronto. He's the former ambassador from Canada to Israel. He's been an ambassador in a couple of other places as well. He's a long-term person in the Foreign Service in Canada, and he's now an academic. He also runs a charity that we'll talk about a little bit in regards to what he's trying to do in regards to bringing Israelis and Palestinians together. But your article is interesting because you go through, which I don't think a lot of people have done, 6 different issues that you think need to be addressed to solve the situation in the Middle East. And a lot of people think the issue of the settlements, the issue of Jerusalem, et cetera, are intractable and can't be solved. Could you go through each one of these issues if you could? Tell us what the issue is and how you think it could be solved.
Sure. Well, one of the main issues is the status of Jerusalem. Historically, any end to the conflict was going to see West Jerusalem be the capital of Israel, and East Jerusalem was going to be the capital of Palestine. And that's something that Israel is going to have to compromise on. The Temple Mount, where the Jews believe the temple was destroyed, and where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is now, the third most sacred site in the Muslim religion. That area, it was thought and hoped, would be internationalized in the sense that no one would own it, that it would be open to all religions. And so that's the compromise that has to be made there. Another of the, quote, intractable, unquote, issues was the right of return. You'll be aware that in 1948, during the War of Independence, 750,000 Palestinians who lived in what is now Palestine, a combination of Israel and the West Bank and Gaza, were expelled by Israel, or they left voluntarily, believing that a war with 5 Arab states against Israel would be victorious and they would come back. So 750,000 left. They are now millions of Palestinians who live in Lebanon, who live in Jordan, in camps, which are actually cities. They're called refugee camps, but they're really cities. And there are those in Gaza that were forced out at the time, and others around the world. And the Palestinians have long talked about a right of return, that if any peace agreement is reached, they should all be able to come back to Israel, to their homes. And that's clearly not going to happen. You're not going to have millions of Palestinians who live abroad now coming back, because that would overturn the balance. Israel would no longer be majority Jewish. So the idea has been, it was discussed, something like 100,000 Palestinians would be able to come back, and others would go to Palestine, to the new state of Palestine. Or the vast majority, frankly, would stay where they are because they have homes and children, and their children go to school. It's not as if everybody wants to pick up and move at this point. So that's another issue. Another crucial issue for Israelis and Israel is security. And the idea was that at least for the first significant amount of time, the Palestinian state would be demilitarized. They would not have a formal army. They would have a gendarmerie, and they would take care of their own security. And the international community would ensure that there would be peace between Israel and Palestine. Israel obviously takes care of itself. Canada, the United States, and some other countries have been working for years, since I was there, with a Canadian general in charge, and ever since, on various security measures that would be put in place to ensure that both sides would be able to live in peace going forward. Frankly, on that front, I always do say, Israel has lived beside Syria, beside Jordan, beside Egypt, beside Lebanon, and not far from Iraq, and they have more than survived. They are the most successful country in the region. They have the largest military in the region. They have the best economy, one of the best in the OECD until this recent war. They can certainly live beside a Palestinian state without feeling an existential threat. Then there's borders, and you mentioned settlements. And there is obviously a huge problem. There's 750,000 settlers who are now occupying parts of the West Bank. But 500,000 of those are in what are called the major settlement blocks. They have been there for decades, and they are not going away. And the idea, as was discussed at the time, was there would be a swap. Israel would keep those blocks. They don't actually impede movement within the West Bank that much. They're all right on the border of Israel and the West Bank, encroaching into the West Bank. They would remain, and there would be a swap. Israel would have to give up the same amount of territory, the same quality to the Palestinians in another part, which is also bordering on the West Bank. And then you've got the problem of dealing with the other 250,000 settlers, most of them who are illegal at Israeli law. All settlers are illegal in international law, but even in Israeli law, many of those other settlers are illegal. And they're going to either have to remain in a Palestinian state, or they're going to move, be offered land in Israel with economic incentives, whatever. But they're going to have to leave, or they're going to stay under another state. So those are the main issues. Prime Minister Netanyahu added an extra issue when he claimed, for the only time that he ever did in 2009, he set out the issues that would have to be resolved for a state. He said that the Palestinians would have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Now, when you recognize countries in international law, you recognize a state. You don't recognize their ethnicity or their religious nature. You recognize a state. We recognize Israel. He wanted the Palestinians to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Well, frankly, 20% of Israel is not Jewish. 20% of Israel, 22% now, are Arab Israelis who are either Christian or Muslim. And it's frankly a bit much to ask any Arab state, any Muslim country, to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, which essentially sends a message that the non-Jews in Israel are second-class citizens somehow. We don't recognize Saudi Arabia as a Muslim state. We recognize Saudi Arabia as a state, even though they call themselves a Muslim state. The same with the UAE, the same with Bahrain, etc., etc. So I frankly don't think that's a big issue. Prime Minister Netanyahu would, but I think if the Palestinians continue to recognize Israel as a state and acknowledge that its existence and it should live in peace and security, that's what's important.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about things people say and what your reaction to them is. Some people think that Israel is an apartheid state. What would you say to that, sir?
Well, I don't think Israel is an apartheid state within its boundaries, within what we call the Green Line. There is some discrimination against Israeli Arabs, but there's discrimination in Canada against Indigenous people. There's discrimination in the United States against blacks. Countries are not perfect. There was more equality between Israeli Arabs and Jewish Israelis before the Netanyahu government passed what was called the nation-state law and actually downgraded the Arab Israelis. But I still don't think that's apartheid. Where there is apartheid is in the West Bank. That's apartheid because essentially what you have is a situation where a minority, Israel, and the IDF control a majority population, the Palestinians. They essentially control the security of the area. They control what can go in, what can come out. They have blocked off many roads in order to protect existing settlements. And so you've got a minority basically overseeing a majority population which has no voting rights, no equality of education, no equality of transportation, no equality of accommodation. So that is apartheid, but Israel is not, an apartheid state writ large. The occupation's illegal. All Western countries, all countries, frankly, recognize that. The settlements are illegal. The International Court of Justice has ruled that the occupation is illegal and the settlements. So it's problematic, but apartheid is in the West Bank, in Israel, some discrimination, but not so.
On the other side, is from the river to the sea a terrorist comment, strategy, statement?
Well, it's very interesting you ask that, because there's two sets of people that are talking about from the river to the sea right now. There's Hamas, which has said, Israel should, Palestinians should rule Israel in a caliphate or in a one state from the river to the sea. And then there are the messianic ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are saying and have held up maps, and the prime minister has held up a map in the United Nations showing Israel from the river to the sea. So my response to that is both of them are inflammatory. Both of them are talking about an illegal future. Both of them are basically trying to end what I consider to be the only answer to peace in the area, which is the two-state solution. When young people on campuses scream from the river to the sea, I don't know what they're talking about. Are they talking about one state? One state it's not something that I agree with. It's not something that I think will ever happen. I can tell you why. But if you're talking about that, then that is not, that is anti-Zionist and it's anti-Israel. It's not necessarily anti-Semitic. There are Jews like Peter Beinart, well-known Jewish intellectual, who now supports the one-state solution, where all of the people end up in an election and they vote, and whoever wins, wins. That's one version of from the river to the sea. Another version of from the river to the sea is wipe out Israel, wipe out the Jews, and only Arabs will live in that area. That is anti-Jewish, it's anti-Israel, it's anti-Zionist. So it's complicated. And what kids on university campuses say, frankly, is not going to be determinative of what's going to happen in the Middle East.
South Africa and some other countries have gone to the International Criminal Court and have said that the current prime minister in Israel and the IDF, I guess, are guilty of war crimes because they're committing genocide against Palestinians. What do you say to that, sir?
Well, let me just say there's two things going on. In the International Criminal Court, which deals with individuals, Prime Minister Netanyahu and his former Minister of Defense, there is a warrant for their arrest for war crimes. So that's one set of issues. Individuals to be prosecuted, like Vladimir Putin and other leaders. There was a Yugoslav war crimes tribunal that prosecuted individuals from Serbia. On the other hand, there's the International Court of Justice, which deals with state crimes, and South Africa has brought a case to the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide. As far as I'm concerned, there's no question in my mind that Israel has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. I mean, it's all you have to do is listen to the statements of various ministers, including the Minister of Defense, not just the right-wing messianics, including the President of Israel, including the Prime Minister, who have all intimated that all Gazans are Hamas, and that they all have to be wiped out. I mean, these have been statements that were made, some of them right after October 7, that can be understood in that context, others that have continued. But an 11-week siege is by definition a war crime. That's collective punishment against an entire population when you're trying to attack an enemy of 40,000 max out of 2.1 million people. So that in itself, indiscriminate bombing is a war crime. In other words, if you've decided that there is a Hamas terrorist in a building, or 3 of them in a building, are you entitled to level the entire building and everybody in it in order to get those 3 Hamas? That's a question of proportionality. And in each case, you make a decision, i.e. the international legal system will make a decision. Obviously, in the first instance, it's the IDF that makes the decision. In the second instance, it'll be the international legal community that will decide. But when Israel says that they believe there was a camera on top of a building and then kills 20 people, 5 journalists, medical personnel, on top of a hospital, and then sends a second rocket in there as rescuers are going up. That sounds to me like indiscriminate action. That sounds to me like a war crime. So this has been going on for months and months and months, where there has been, and Israel has admitted that their rules of engagement have been loosened, that they are loosened from past wars that they fought. And there's no question that they have a right of self-defense. There's no question that they have a right to go after Hamas. But one has to remember that a right to go after your enemy is not a right to do anything at any time with as much force as you want. We developed rules of international humanitarian law after World War II, when the Americans bombed Dresden to bits, when they dropped bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when prisoners were improperly treated. Japanese, did horrible things to prisoners. These rules of humanitarian law were developed precisely to say, yes, you have a right to self-defense. Yes, you have a right to kill the enemy. But in the course of that, you don't have a right to treat prisoners improperly. You don't have a right to indiscriminately kill innocent women and children as you're trying to defeat the enemy. There are limits on that. And I think, unfortunately, Israel has gone beyond those limits. Whether you want to call it genocide, which is a very specific crime with a specific intent to essentially remove all or part of a population, to destroy all or part of a population, that is a decision that will be taken up by the International Court of Justice. But war crimes, crimes against humanity, I do think they have been committed, and there are any number of independent international lawyers who will argue that, including Israeli international lawyers, including Jewish international lawyers. And this is not about anti-Semitism, and it's not about anti-Israel. It's about looking at what's happening on the ground and saying, this is disproportionate. You are killing too many innocent people in your effort to try and wipe out Hamas.
I appreciate your comments, sir. I'm going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments, because I'm going to ask our guest, Jon Allen, about anti-Semitism. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Really hard-hitting conversation tonight with Jon Allen about what's going on in the Middle East. And he knows what he's talking about because he was a former ambassador from Canada to Israel. The first Jewish ambassador, you said, sir, to Israel, which I find, frankly, surprising.
First Jewish Foreign Service ambassador. First ambassador from the Foreign Service. We had a couple of Jewish ambassadors that were political appointees before that.
I stand corrected. Thank you. I appreciate that. But I'm still surprised. And I wanted to ask about that because you mentioned anti-Semitism, and I wanted to know how you feel about that. Um, and I'll just give you a little bit of my frame of reference. My great aunt, Christian, married a Jewish gentleman. Sidney Pierce was his name, and he was the first Foreign Service officer that was Jewish that was ever appointed ambassador. And that was back, 50, 70 years ago, and that was considered, unbelievable in Canada to have a Jewish Foreign Service officer named an ambassador. It wasn't to Israel, it was to the UK. Is there anti-Semitism in Canada today? Are you worried about that?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, you're talking about an era in the 50s when my father grew up and when Jews, there were quotas in universities, there were many, many clubs the Jews couldn't get into. There were areas of Toronto like Rosedale where a Jew couldn't live, couldn't buy a home. And then over time decreased significantly, and Jews played a larger and larger role in society. The governor of the Bank of Canada was Jewish. 2 of our clerks of the Privy Council have been Jewish. Any number of ambassadors have been Jewish, and ministers, etc., etc. And so there was a very positive period. And frankly, I think, in the 90s and the 2000s, I would say really, frankly, from my perspective, up until the war, and up until this war, anti-Semitism had not completely by any stretch, but a lot of it was in its ugly holes in the ground, hidden, and people were reluctant to be openly anti-Semitic. You had bursts of it from time to time, and undoubtedly people felt anti-Semitic. That's a hatred of Jews. Let's get that. A hatred of somebody because they are Jewish. It's not criticism of Israel. It's not criticism of the IDF. It's not criticism of Zionism. It's criticism of Jews as Jews because they are Jewish, because you want a scapegoat, just the way Americans, find immigrants today as their scapegoat. But what certainly since October 7, and really since following October 7, there has been a very significant increase in anti-Semitism, I would say. Part of it is because anti-Semites now feel emboldened to be able to come out and say things that they wanted to say for a long time. I would say that's probably the minority. I would say there's also an anti-Semitism that is a result of confusion between what's a Jew, what's an Israeli. Is Israel the state of the Jews? And if it's the state of the Jews, is it my state, Jon Allen's state, who's Jewish and lives in Canada? And therefore, if I'm opposed to what Israel's doing, I'm opposed to Jon Allen, who's Jewish, living in Canada? Or am I opposed to what Israel's doing because they're Jews? Or am I opposed to what Israel's doing because it's the IDF killing Palestinians? It's complicated. Jewishness is a religion. Jewishness is an ethnicity. It's a cultural thing. There are a lot of Jews who, don't go to synagogue, just like there's a lot of Christians that never go to church anymore. And we are sort of ethnic, cultural Jews, still with, ties to our history, ties to the Holocaust, ties to pogroms in Europe. So yes, there's been an increase in real anti-Semitism. There's been an increase in anti-Israel feelings, in anti-Zionism, sort of the same thing, anti-Israel, anti-Zionism. But my feeling, and I'll just say one other thing, my worry is that it has infected the school system. I'm less worried about it. I have not experienced an iota of anti-Semitism since the war began, personally, and I think many Jews can say that. But their kids and their grandkids have experienced it at universities, and I am hearing, and there is evidence that in the school system, somehow this anti-Israel and anti-Semitism sentiment has been creeping in, and young Jewish kids in elementary school, in high school, and certainly at universities are experiencing it. I would just say, though, that when this war finally ends, I am hopeful and I believe that a lot of this will die down. We don't see the protests at universities anymore. We don't see that river to the sea and that mix of anti-Israel and anti-Jewish that we saw there. And I'm really hoping that finally it will begin to significantly die down. The other thing I just want to say is there is plenty of Islamophobia that in this time a lot of people are ignoring. Palestinians and Muslims in this country have suffered from anti-Muslim feelings since before 9/11, after 9/11, and up until right now, where every Muslim is considered a terrorist kind of thing. Not the case, obviously, but that's the equivalent of every Jew being seen as a supporter of the IDF, and therefore anti-Semitism reigns. So you've got to realize that this is happening in our society. It's horrible, irrespective of who it's targeting, and it should stop.
We're out of time, sir. I really appreciate it. But tell us quickly about Rosanna Canada, which is a not-for-profit you chair, sir.
I chair the Canadian affiliate. We have affiliates in the States, in the UK, and elsewhere. We raise money for projects in Israel and Palestine. Every project has both Israelis and Palestinians, and I'm talking about either West Bank or historically Gazans, who work together in the health field. They are being trained together. Nurses are being trained together. Palestinian medical teams are going out into West Bank villages, remote villages, using Israeli technology. We had Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, and Palestinians being trained in PTSD in children. Obviously, a lot of children being affected by wars in general and this war. We have a whole series of transportation of Palestinians from the checkpoints to hospital visits in Israel. 100,000 Palestinians are treated in Israeli hospitals every year. We transport them so they don't have to pay to get there. We have a whole series of projects in the health field that bring together Israelis and Palestinians. They got through October 7th, one of the most difficult periods in the history of the land. They got through it together. Our staff are working together, and the people being trained and treated are working together. Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace, in trust, with respect, and we are just trying to demonstrate that this is possible and preparing ourselves for a time when there is indeed a two-state solution.
Jon Allen, your positivity, your hopefulness for peace and a two-state solution is very comforting, and I appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good night.